Hi, I'm your host, Reena Suri, and welcome to Thriving Changes, a place where we share stories from brave and courageous people who have navigated challenges, crisis, or a change in their personal or professional life and gave it a new meaning. It's a platform where leaders open up about their fears, vulnerabilities, and the journey that led them to triumph. Our hope is to inspire and motivate others to take their first step towards thriving changes. Imagine a life with no arms and no legs, the kind of challenges one would have to face every day. Taking care of some basic needs would require thought and help, like taking a shower, using the restroom. I don't know how I'll cope up with a challenge like that. Well, that wasn't a problem for Pauline Victoria. Born without arms and legs, Pauline chose to defy the odds and courageously built a fulfilling life as a wife, mother, businesswoman, and a motivational speaker. In today's podcast, Pauline Victoria will share insights into her life journey and the choice she makes every day, which is to live a joyful, grateful, and abundant life. I hope you enjoy this podcast. Hi, Pauline. Welcome to Thriving Changes. I am so grateful that you took out the time, and I'm really excited about the conversation. I'm really excited to know and learn more about you, your life. You fascinate me, being somebody with no arms and no legs. I can't even think about a life like that. There are so many. I want to just understand how you live, how you've lived all your life, and how do you face every day or today. Anyway, welcome, and I am so looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you, Rena. I really appreciate being here and having the opportunity to speak to your audience.
Thank you. So let's start from the beginning. When did your parents know that? I don't know if that time there was something like a sonogram or that they could detect that it's going to be a child with no arms or legs, or it came as a surprise to them when you were born. And is there a reason why kids are born with no arms and no legs? Help me understand.
Yeah, no, the beginning is always a good place to start. And to answer your primary question about did my parents know that I was going to be born without arms and legs? And the answer is no. They did have an ultrasound done. They had all the typical prenatal tests completed while my mom was pregnant with me. And nothing indicated that I was going to have any sort of deformities or birth defects. They could see that I was breech, and because of that, they knew that if when my mom went into labor, that they were going to do a cesarean. And so it was clear enough for them to see that I was upside down and not in the right positioning to come out, my mom, for a natural birth. And so it was a shock to the doctors as well as to my parents when I was born. And as a mom myself, I can't even imagine giving birth to my child, thinking it's a normal pregnancy, everything is healthy and fine, and to be told that it's not, and that your child doesn't have 10 fingers or 10 little toes. And so my mother, back in the 70s when I was born, for cesareans, they made the woman unconscious. And so my mom had no idea any of this was happening. And so as soon as I was born, they told my father, who then wanted to be the one to share the news with my mom. And when she finally became conscious, he told her the situation. And I came out very sick, high fever, and they couldn't figure out why. And so when my father told my mother what it was happening, she answered with 4 words. And those 4 words were very powerful. And it's something I've utilized throughout my life. I would say maybe it's like the anthem of my life. And those 4 words were, "Thy will be done." And so it is in that moment, the way my mom responded was an invitation to God to come into our story and to create miracles and blessings. At this point, they didn't know if my brain worked. They wouldn't know until I was much older, like in about 8 months or 9 months old when babies start talking or whatever. So my parents, regardless of what the doctors were recommending, which was to give me up into an institution because that was what was normal back then. The doctors, of course, were very logical with my parents. You're not equipped. You weren't prepared. You don't have the resources. You have no idea what you're doing. And all of those reasons to give me up made logical, rational sense. But when it comes to love, sometimes we're irrational. And what people would say is crazy. But we do, love is one of those things where you can't explain why you would do something illogical and crazy. And so they did move forward and decided to take me home, even though the doctors recommended otherwise. And my parents don't know exactly why I was born without arms and legs. There's several reasons. Some, it can be genetic, but both my parents were tested and their genes were normal. And so it's interesting because right now I'm in the process of potentially, because my parents are both in the Air Force, so they're veterans. And
Mm.
an act was just recently passed called the PACT Act. And based on that, I've been doing a lot of research as to why, because if my parents, it wasn't a genetic problem, then there must have been some sort of outside exposure to have caused such deformities. And so going back into my parents' history, there may have been exposure to toxins such as Agent Orange during the Vietnam War when my father was stationed in Thailand. My mom was working in the Air Force Base as a nurse and had to deal with cancer patients who were going through radiation. So it could have been radiation. It could have been the perfect storm, right, for me to be
Mm.
born like this. But right now, it's interesting now because now I'm in my 40s and having to figure out, okay, what happened and why? Where was the mystery? And it's like my own mystery that I'm having to go down the road with and try to figure out because everyone wants to know why, what happened. And for the most part, time of my life, of course, I would like to know. But ultimately, I did mention God. I'm very, very spiritual and connected with God. And really, what it comes down to is God chose to make me this way. I don't think he makes mistakes. I've had people want to pray over me or tell me that I don't believe enough and that's why I'm not healed. And I disagree with that because I feel like God doesn't make mistakes. And he may have withheld the news from my parents until the day I was born. So they don't have time to think themselves out of doing what they would naturally do, which is rely on God's grace and guidance to raise me in the best possible way they knew how.
Wow. So interesting to know these details. And I think it's commendable that you are going down the road to research and learn what, not that it matters anymore, I think, but just to have an understanding and a learning to contribute towards science and discovery and what it could be and create awareness about it. Those particular exposures or external factors could have been a reason how infants can get affected during pregnancy or even prior. Our bodies, our cells, and
Mhm.
how they change, or it can contribute. I don't know if your parents, if your mom got pregnant during that time, or did she get pregnant during that time when they
Yeah,
were stationed there?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
and if you do research like Agent Orange, which was the herbicide that the Air Force people actually, they're the ones who transported it. So
mm,
it's probably a good indication that my parents or my father was exposed to it. But one of the effects of it is that it does cause limb deformities. And it is an interesting thing. It's like life keeps it interesting. And it's another mystery that whether I solve it or not, like you mentioned, it doesn't change the way my character of who I am as a person or how I am going to choose to live my life and have chosen to live my life. But it is interesting just to, it would be, I guess, closure or validation as to figure out why. Like,
Why?
how did this happen?
I guess we are all just curious because I know that knowing you and whatever little that I know of you, I know that you are not the victim here. You don't take yourself as a victim here. And you live a very fulfilled, happy, and you're very comfortable with who you are.
Yeah.
So I know that it's not because of that you're doing. It's just, as you said, a closure and to increase awareness, I think, too, so that in future we have that awareness that okay, these are things that can potentially harm a newborn or an embryo, and what precautions one should take if people are people in the armed forces or living in high conflict areas.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and I think any knowledge is always beneficial. I think it keeps us growing. I'm a learner. No, I consider myself a
Yeah.
lifelong. So just to take a deep dive into it. For example, I understand why, because I have PTSD and it is that curiosity. And I was so fortunate. It just how life happens that when we moved to the United States, my undergrad degree, some of the credits didn't get transferred, and I had to do my undergrad again. I wanted to come and do my master's here, but when I got my certifications evaluated, I realized that I'll have to meet some undergrad courses. And technically, the rule is that if you invariably need to repeat your major. So, just to understand that, I decided to take psychology. And as you have to study and choose a final topic to study, I chose PTSD
Mm,
to understand how it works. And it's not that it goes away, but I just wanted to understand why and how and what I can do to live a more healthier life and to build my resilience.
yeah.
I get where you're coming from, just to get that closure and understanding.
Yeah. Well, and I think any way that we can increase our self awareness,
Yeah,
it's a great thing to do because the more you know yourself, the more you can own yourself. And when you can own yourself, then you have the confidence and the courage to be able to take some risks or jump out of your comfort zone a little bit or think outside the box. There's so much that is available when we learn more about ourselves. And I think it's never futile. So I think it's really interesting how you went back to school and in that learning, you didn't only learn about a condition, you learned more about who you are as a person, which I'm sure then shifted your trajectory.
absolutely.
Mm.
That's so beautifully put. I never would have put it that way, but it is so concise and to the point. Very well said, I
Thank you.
think. And that's exactly what happened, that I was able to own myself and be comfortable with who I am and understand my condition and be more proactive towards it to deal with it.
Mm. Yes,
So
and I
beautiful.
love that because it's you dealing with it, not it dealing with you. And so we become at the cause of our life versus at the effect of a circumstance.
Absolutely. So true. So true. Wise words. So tell us, how was your childhood? I'm sure it was full of challenges, both for your parent and for you. Tell us a little bit about how did you cope up with some everyday challenges, going to school, traveling, commuting, schoolwork, things like that. What was life like?
I had an amazing childhood. My parents had a beautiful dance between nurturing love and tough love. The nurturing love, of course, came very natural to my mom. She's Filipino, she's from the Philippines. They're very nurturing in nature and really wanted to make sure that my needs were taken care of. My father was a good balance to her because he was able to put his emotional side to the side so that way I had space to figure out what I was truly capable of. So the best way to illustrate this is a story that my parents told me. I was probably around 1 years old and I was on the floor in our living room and I started fussing. And by this time, my mom And my dad knew my fusses. And so my fuss was I wanted to sit up. And so my mom went forward to sit me up, and my dad held her back and said, let's see if she can figure it out on her own. And I proceeded to throw a temper tantrum. I do have one little tiny leg, and I was like kicking that, and I was crying, and I was angry, and they did not interfere with that process. And eventually I rolled over to a nearby wall, and I used my head to scooch up the wall and sit myself up. And it was the first time I sat myself up. And what is so beautiful about the way they raised me in that story is that we really find out what we're truly made of when we're given the space to get frustrated, to get angry, not be comfortable. And because of that approach that my parents took with me in raising me, I have become very comfortable with being uncomfortable and not knowing exactly how I'm going to do things. Uncertainty is a huge fear of people. And it's not that I am absolved of the ability to be scared, because uncertainty can scare me too. But I know that I can work through uncertainty or discomfort. And I know I'm going to be okay on the other side. So I don't shy away from situations that I find challenging or uncomfortable. And that was the way my parents allowed me to figure out. I taught myself how to write. I figured out how I was going to eat my food with silverware. I figured out everything. There's no like model instructions. Step one, hold the pen in your chin. So there's nothing in my life that has ever been taught to me based on prior example. I really had to figure life out on my own and what I was capable on my own. And what I love about that, though, is that a lot of people will take the approach to life, I got to see it to believe it. Everything in my life, I've always had to believe it before I could see it, whether it be swimming or driving or having a baby. Like, I had to have a conviction about what I wanted. And then I found a way to make that happen. And it's a life that is based on faith and willpower. But it's what got me through a lot of hard times. Like I said, my childhood was really amazing, but my teenage years was really, really hard, because when you're a teenager, all you want to do is belong. And I didn't belong. I didn't fit in. I didn't blend in. I couldn't wear the cute shoes or get my hair just right. And the teenage years, there was a bigger gap that was happening between me and my friends, because they could go out, they could get in a car, and I couldn't. And so I'd be staying at home on Friday nights and Saturday nights while they were out with each other and having fun and going to parties. And that was probably the hardest part. But it's through that hardship, that feeling like I didn't belong on this planet, because it did lead to thoughts of suicide, but it also led me to rely on God a little bit more, because nothing on this earth was helping me. There was nothing, there was no more strength I had inside me from me. And I remember when I was 15 years old sitting in church and just being really angry with God and frustrated. And I let him have it. I didn't care. I'm like, I have nothing left to lose. I'm just going to tell you how it is. And I was able to release a lot of negative emotion toward him, because I felt like, well, he did this to me. And so I remember just feeling spent, that when you're in that emotional state and you're doing the ugly cry, and then you just feel exhausted, like you don't have anything left to give. And in that moment, I felt a real strong peace come over me. And I heard, not like an auditory, but like a message that kind of just downloaded in my mind. Do you trust me? Like, your pain is not in vain. Do you trust me? And as soon as I said yes, I felt released from the frustrations and the anger that I was dealing with, because it was the first time I surrendered my circumstance and myself to a higher power. And in doing so, when you surrender yourself, it leads to an acceptance. And when you just accept something for what it is, there's nothing to be fixed, there's nothing broken, there's nothing to change. It's just this peace about it. And even though my circumstances will never change, my heart changed in that moment.
Wow, what a beautiful story and very powerful. Though, just the way that you came about to accepting yourself and that experience. And you answered my next question, that how did you deal with it? It just flowed automatically. And just the power uh, going. I used to volunteer at a church here, and the department head, they used to live by that you have to go through it to be on the other side, and especially with grief, any kind of loss or disappointment, hurt, but we have to allow ourselves to experience it, and only then can we be on the other side and truly let go. And you have just narrated exactly how to do it and to be with it. Just, it's so powerful. And what changed for you in that moment? Like, how did life change after that for you? Especially in that time, you were still 15 and your friends were still going out partying. But instead of having those suicidal thoughts and being sad, how did it change?
Yeah. The way I perceived it, it wasn't like as the victim of, oh, you didn't include me and I missed out, like that FOMO, fear of missing out
Mm,
type of thing. I didn't have that anymore. I was at peace with wherever I was in the moment, whether it was at home with my family or with my friends. So it shifted my perspective because I knew that there was something bigger at play. It wasn't like God didn't do this to me to see me be sad or hurt. And I trusted that there was a purpose to the process.
a bigger purpose to this process. And
Yeah.
what
Yeah. And
it's
when you have that, you just live differently. You see things differently. You see the circumstances not from the place of victimhood, but from a place of empowerment. And that I get to have the privilege of being part of that story.
beautiful.
Mhm.
I remember in a conversation when we just met to catch up and get to know each other. And I asked you, have you ever taken any kind of mental health support or counseling? And you said, oh, I've never done that. And I was like, wow, it's to have, and I can see where that resilience come from, because I think a lot of it, a lot of that credit goes to your parents, the way they've raised you, and your mom's words that it will be done, that immediate reaction to a news like that. She wasn't the victim here, it was acceptance, instant acceptance to what it was,
Yeah.
and to welcome you regardless then the challenges that it would bring to their lives. It was that resilience in her, and both your parents inculcated that in you from the very beginning.
Yes.
So that mindset, it's been conditioned over time since your childhood to beat the odds and to face challenges and figure out how to deal with life, your everyday issues. And
Mhm.
now I see where it comes from. So did you go after school? Did you go to college?
Yep. I was hearing you talk and I'm like, oh, or maybe I'm just really selfish and I just won't be stopped by anybody. I don't know which one it is, resilience or
No.
selfishness. But yes, I always joke because I'm like, ah, God gave me a independent spirit, like a spirit that wants to be free and adventurous and a body that is not always able to do so. And that spirit though still is inside me, and it was inside me after high school, and I wanted to go away to college. But the thing was, I didn't want to go away to college because my home life sucked or because I was trying to run away from anything. In fact, if I stayed home, my life would be taken very well care of. I was surrounded by family who knew my needs, exactly what I needed. I didn't have to train anybody to help me in the restroom or get me food or anything. So In fact, if I stayed home, life would have been very easy. But I felt a pull. I felt like something was pulling me out of that comfort zone. And I knew that in order for me to figure out if I could really live my life on my own as an adult, I had to go in order to grow. And so my parents made a deal with me. They said, okay, if you go to a local college here, you can live in the dorm. So I said, great. Because at least then, if I needed help, my parents were only a 20-minute drive away. And so I did go to Santa Clara University, where I majored and got my bachelor's degree in communication and specifically in broadcast journalism. And so I lived in the dorm for 2 years and then in an apartment with some friends the last 2 years. And I had the full college experience, and it was amazing. Academics, the academic world is, I'm not going to say easy, but it's protected, right? As a child, as somebody with a disability, the academic world will try to make sure that I have equal access to everything, to be able to do my assignments, to be able to meet the requirements of my graduation. And so, from that perspective, it's very sheltered. And I competed along my peers as just the same. And I feel like I competed well, got good grades. I was able to graduate. I had 2 internships while I was in college. So when I graduated college, I had an actual resume that I could go into the real world with. So I was feeling very good about myself. I did prove that I could live on my own. I had amazing roommates. I had great supports through the university. But it was after college when I entered the real world where I was completely shocked by the doors being slammed in my face because there was no shelter to protect me anymore. I remember every interview. I am originally from Silicon Valley, so most interviews there or the process for hiring starts with a phone interview. And during the phone interviews, I ace it every time. They'd be like, "Oh my gosh, you sound amazing. Let's bring you in for the in-person interview." And at this point in my life, I was probably my early 20s. I got very good at reading people. It's something I had to do in order to survive, right? Like, who can I ask for help? Who's comfortable around me? Who's not comfortable around me? I got used to helping people feel comfortable. Like, I took on the responsibility of making sure people felt comfortable around me. And I remember going into in person interviews and showing up and them not really hearing me throughout the interview because they were in their heads about their discomfort around me. It was a reality check of this is the real world now. There is no more protection for me. And that was probably one of the hardest things I had to experience. When an interview, you only have so many minutes to charm them and get them to see you. And when they don't see you, there's nothing you can do about it. They had already made up their mind. And so I had to humble myself, and I went and got a job through a disability organization that I was way overqualified for, but it was a piece of humble pie. And I went into the job. They hired people with disabilities to do those surveys. You know, like you get a call, "Hi, do you have 20 minutes to fill out the survey?" That was me. And I made a decision. I said, fine, I will humble myself to get into the company, but I'm doing this to get my foot in the door. All people need to see is my quality of work, and they will want to hire me. And within 3 months, I was hired as a full-time working position in a completely different department. So it was a hard road after the academics world that I was protected in. But I eventually, anytime I needed to get my foot in the door into a company, I just had to humble myself because people don't expect a lot from me. They see me. And my mom would always say this to me when I was younger: "You're lucky people don't expect a lot from you." So the moment you do anything, they're totally impressed, which is great. But I had to adopt this idea of I have to prove myself to make sure that I'm just as valuable, if not more valuable than anybody else here. So to all that to being said, I'm not afraid of hard work because I've had to work 10 times harder than everybody else to get the same thing.
Such a valuable input, I think. And it's the reality of life. Although I do want to go back when you commented on selfishness, I didn't want to interrupt you at that time. But I don't think so. I mean, selfish people are very different. The kind of life that you're living, it's more about being self reliant, not selfish. It's about learning. And now it is about giving back to the society and empowering others through your talks and workshops and podcast, everything. Selfish people just want to do it for themselves. There's a difference.
Yes,
Being
thank
in
you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to bring that up. And what I think what you are doing is more of a purpose driven life. It is understanding that there is a larger call to being who you are in physically and how you can impact other people's life and perspectives through your story and your strength and courage, resilience and self-reliance. So I look at it very differently.
Yeah, thank you for the distinction. Yes,
Yeah.
thank you. Yeah, and I really do hope that my story, the purpose for it all, remember when I'm 15 years old and saying your pain is not in vain,
Yeah.
that it all happened not just for me, but for anybody that I can have the opportunity to inspire and to believe in their own strength and in their own purpose. That there is pain that each one of us goes through. My pain is no more bigger or more important or more significant than anybody else's. If we are living life, we've all experienced pain in some way. And the reality of it is, though, is that there are people who can use their pain as a crutch or as an excuse. And then there are people who can use their pain and turn it into power. So it's just a matter of choice. And
Yeah.
when people say, people want to know, you said it in the beginning, I could not imagine living a life without arms and legs. And I think when people meet with me for the first time or see me at the grocery store or at the beach or whatever, that's what goes in their mind. They put themselves in my position and think, I could never, ever do that. And I want people to know that you are stronger than you know. And thank God you don't have to go through this, but you had to go through something. And it's okay though, because there's something bigger at play here and that we all are significant and we all matter. And I remember my mom, she said when she held me for the first time that she looked into my eyes and she knew that I mattered. And so when you know that your very existence and all your experiences matter, it gives you a different reason for living and not choosing to make the pain the excuse, but make the pain to be your personal power to change not just your life, but others. And it's
Yeah.
amazing when we can do that.
You're just telling us our tagline, the podcast tagline. The name is Thriving Changes, and the tagline is to thrive is a choice. What do you choose? And
Ah,
you just
perfect. I didn't even know that. Didn't plan this, did
exactly. I know.
I?
So thank you. This is such a significant analogy or a story to our tagline.
Oh,
So
goosebumps.
I know. I am like so thrilled about it. I want to just clarify. I know that you said that you took up a job, you were hired from that, but I also thought that you had your own business also. So was there a transition?
Yeah. So I did work after college. I worked and bought a house when I was 23 and got married and then eventually had a baby.
We will come to that.
Yes. Yes. That's another story for
That's
later.
another story.
Yes. But we decided to move to Hawaii so that I could experience being a full mom. Like I've always lived each chapter so deeply and fully. So I don't have any regrets. And being a mom was one
So
of
let's
those.
Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt. Let's go back there. I wanted to ask you. So, if that transition is happening now, and we can talk about the business later, now that you're onto this topic, so how did you meet your husband? And just to share a little bit about that.
Yeah. So my husband was a driver for a paratransit service. A paratransit service is where they take people with disabilities or the elderly who can't take public transportation to and from their locations. I didn't wasn't driving at the time yet, and I was using the paratransit to go to work. And I met my husband because he was one of the drivers there. And it was really my only second time having this driver. His name is Ted. And he dropped me off at a job interview at Stanford University. And as he went to open the door, I turned to say goodbye to him. And he said it was as if God lifted the veil from his eyes and he saw me for who I truly was. And he fell immediately in love with me. And usually you don't see the same drivers, maybe every 3 to 6 months, but he was showing up every day to pick me up from work to go home. And I was like, wow, this is really weird. And so what happened was he was friends with the dispatch guy and he made sure that I was on his schedule every day so he could talk with me and get to know me. And so eventually we started dating, and the rest is history. We got married. He did have kids from previous marriage. We're a blended family. My whole family, we're traditional Filipino, and they're like, oh, he's divorced, he has kids, and it's a lot of baggage. You sure you want that? And I said, yeah, because he said he'll live to make me happy. What else does a woman want? So you'll have this other human being live to make you happy. And he has. So we've been together since 99, so 25 years.
Oh,
And
wow.
we raised his kids together. And then I also had a baby with him as well.
So that I'm really curious to know your own pregnancy journey and share a little bit about that. Were you scared to even think about having a baby? Tell us what went into your mind.
Yeah. Well, I think like at 28 years old, I would start experiencing that biological clock ticking. You're like, I need to have a baby. I need to have a baby. But because my husband had kids from previous marriage, I,
Did he have
4.
from his four?
Hmm.
Wow, yeah. And
And
how old were they?
at the time when I wanted to have a baby, they were all the way from 20 to 12.
Okay.
He's older than me, so that's why there's
Mm.
a gap there. But so I really wanted to have a baby, but I didn't want to have a baby without him fully being on board because I knew we would be relying on him a lot, on my husband. And so I remember we were sitting in church one day and he was holding my cousin who was probably 18 months old at the time, and he was holding in her, and he turned to me and whispered, he's like, I think I'm ready to have a baby. And I was like, really? He's like, yeah. And I just started like crying and thanking God. And so as soon as we made the decision, we got pregnant. And I feel like it was almost like my son was up in heaven waiting, hurry up, make your decision. I'm ready to come down. And I got pregnant the first try, and the pregnancy itself was pretty easy. Of course, any woman who has been pregnant the last 4 weeks is really tough on our bodies. But for the most part, it was a very easy pregnancy. The birth was not as easy. I wanted to give birth naturally and really tried to. Unfortunately, it didn't work out that way. And I also had an emergency cesarean. But the important part was we were all safe and alive. And so I had my son, and he just turned 18 last week. So
Oh,
it's very
congratulations.
reminiscent to talk about this right now. I wasn't prepared for something that I was going to experience as a mom. As a mom, we all want to nurture our kid, especially if it's our first, right? You have a certain way you'd be gentle with your child, and you'd change their diapers, and you'd feed them, and you'd bathe them. And I couldn't do any of that. And so my husband did it. But it was hard to watch because men do things differently from a woman. And I think based on like hormonal changes, and then me also not being able to nurture my son in the way that I was feeling naturally called to nurture my son. All of that created the perfect storm for me to be really resentful about my son. It was almost as if he reminded me of how disabled I really was because I couldn't do any of those things for him. And I, for about a week, was like, I don't even want to be a mom. I don't want to even look at my kid. I just felt really apathetic toward him. I felt nothing. And one day that lasted about a week, thank God, only a week. One day I had one of those moments, those surrender moments with God that I mentioned that I had at 15. And the message I got as I was just in this frustration and sadness and depression was that it wasn't about me. God was like, it's not about you. It's about him. Are his needs getting taken care of? Is he getting bathed? Is he getting fed? Is he getting changed? And it's yes. Good. Then it's not about you. You're a mom now. So it's not about you, it's about your child. And that was the moment that I was able to go from surrender to acceptance for the situation for what it was. So I found other ways to be with my son and nurture him. And I may not have been able to pick him up if he fell down, but I could encourage him with my words. We homeschooled. So we homeschooled him from first grade up to now. We're just about to graduate high school. Thank goodness. And it was a beautiful dance our whole family did. I mentioned we're a blended family. And what my parents thought, or my grandparents, my whole family thought was extra baggage from the other kids, really came out to be a treasure because we really did live this idea that it takes a village to raise a child. And they really did step up and love on their brother and help me take care of him in ways I couldn't. But they also respected me being the mom, and they never overstepped with me. And I'm so grateful that I got to go through that experience with them. I think it's something that a lot of women don't get to experience. And to have a baby and it be a complete family affair. It was all of us that raised him. And it was just a really beautiful journey.
What an amazing story. And the power of nurturing relationships, of having that support system. It just shows the kind of love and affection that you all have for each other and support each other. You show up for each other. There is really no difference whose kids they are, and just so beautiful to listen to this. And I mean, there are stories when you hear of difficult childhoods and dysfunctional families, and then you listen to a story like this, and it is so heartwarming and just enriching to hear, and very motivational too, that this is what we need to work towards, and that's all that matters at the end of the day.
Yeah.
This is what matters. These are the people who stand by you, who are there for you every day, who will be there in your difficult times, in your times of happiness.
Thank you.
So then, for some time after your job, you were a stay-at-home mom, and then you transitioned to having starting your own business.
Yeah. So have an ambitious
Spirit.
spirit side of me. So being just a stay at home mom wasn't enough for me. So
Yeah.
I actually joined a network marketing company and started getting into the entrepreneurial world that way. And it led me to go to a big annual event. So network marketing companies, they usually have one event in the year, and it's a time and place to celebrate and to become more motivated and convicted in what you're doing and selling. And I happened to go to the annual event. It was in Reno. And there they hired Les Brown to be the motivational speaker. And it was the first time I had ever heard anyone speak like that. And I was like, wow, yeah, that's pretty impressive. You know what? Let me back up real quick. Before this event, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Nick Vujicic. He also has no arms
Hmm.
and legs, and he's from Australia. And he had come to our island, and I saw him speak. And for the first time, because before that, I had opportunities to go into the speaking circuit. It was like people were pulling me into it and creating opportunities for me to go into it. But I was scared. I was not confident in myself. I didn't feel like I was good enough. And so I really hid from my gift. And that happened probably in my early 20s. And now I'm watching Nick Vujicic speak on stage. And I had a moment where it's like, why? I'm seeing how he's affecting all these people and how I wanted to do that. I also was like, I can do this. I could totally inspire people. And I had that thought when I saw him. Fast forward a couple months later, I see Les Brown speaking, and I'm like, wow, he's amazing. And I was sitting in the lobby later on that day at that event, and I was on the phone making some business calls because I was motivated. And so I'm making sales, and I'm there, and I'm seeing on my peripheral, I see this gentleman like standing there and looking at me. And I'm like, okay, I'm used to it, right? I'm used to being stared at, and I'm very aware of my surroundings. So I do notice when people are doing that. And he starts walking over to me and he says, I need to talk to you. And I look at him and I'm like, I'm on the phone. And he's like, yeah, but I need to talk to you now. And I'm like, oh my gosh, who are you? And okay, hold on. I get off the phone and I turned my attention to him, and it was Les Brown. And he said, I've been listening to you on the phone, and you have a very powerful voice, and I would like to invite you to my training in 4 days in LA. And I'm like, oh, okay. He's like, do whatever you need to do, bring whoever you need to bring to make it happen. And so I get his information and I go back to my team in the big room, auditorium, and I said, I think life just screamed at me. And there's that quote by Oprah, and she said, life will whisper to you, but if you don't pay attention, it will scream. And that was my scream, that I feel like God was shaking me finally, like, come on. Right. So the reason I wanted to share the Nick story is because it was a few months prior that I made a decision that I could use my life for something bigger and to help people. And then Les Brown
That's
shows
true.
up. And then I go to LA and I start on this whole journey of speaking and helping people. And so that's how I started my own business.
And just to back up a little, just for our listeners, if they don't know, both Nick Vujicic and Les Brown, they're both motivational speakers. Nick is also somebody who doesn't have arms and legs. As you said, he's an Australian speaker, but he's pretty well known. You see so many YouTube videos of him. And Les Brown was a radio host, and then he, I believe, had his own show on PBS, the Les Brown Show, and he's a motivational speaker. And I think he ran for Congress also. Was
Yeah,
he?
he served.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so you started your speaking journey.
Yeah.
And is that what you're doing now? That is that what your current? So you have a podcast and you speak at events.
Hmm.
And do you do coaching as well?
I do group coaching, like
Okay.
mostly masterminds and retreats. I can do one-on-one coaching. I have done it in the past, but it's not my favorite thing. But I do have something called the Visibility Challenge, and it has a mastermind with it. It's an evergreen program that I run. I created my company, One Leg Up Productions, originally to support people with disabilities. But after some time serving that population, I realized that it's not where there is a lot of money. So I pivoted and fell in love with entrepreneurs, fell in love with people like me who feel like I have a story, I have experience, I have a skill set that I know can make a difference in people's worlds. So I love entrepreneurs because they are the visionaries and the risk takers. And sometimes they just need a little bit of help. And recently they ask you, okay, what's your title? And I've always said inspirational thought leader, But recently I got the message that I'm also a courage coach, because it takes courage to do anything like that. If you want to make a difference in the world, you want to use your story, you feel like there's a purpose that's been put on you, a calling, and you just don't know how to make it become reality. Like, I'm the person that I would want to be the one to cheer you on and champion you. And more than confidence, more than a skill set, you have to have the courage to be able to step into that and say yes to it.
Yeah, true, so true. So, where can people find you if they're more curious to learn more about you? Is there a website? How can they reach you?
Yep. OneLegUpProductions.com is my website. I'm also on Facebook. I can give you all the links to put in the show notes, and Instagram. So you'll see me a lot. I do a lot of videos, at least 3 videos a week, to put encouraging messages out there to inspire people. A lot of people feel like they have to wait to be invited, and you don't. In this the age of technology today, you're doing it right now with your podcast. You're like, I have something to say. I have other voices I want to highlight. Great. I can do it. And you start a podcast. If someone is interested, I also do have a podcast called the Small Victories Podcast, where I get to interview amazing people with great stories as well. So that's on Spotify and Amazon and all the play Apple podcasts. So wherever you need to get your podcast, I'm available for
Yeah,
that too.
of course. Yeah, I'm sure people will be curious to learn and listen to you and hear other amazing stories as well.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, thank you for sharing all that information. So, how do you look back at it all?
How do I look back at my life? Well, I still think it's a work in progress, and God is still asking me to trust the process. I feel like I have chosen to live my life in a certain way. And people ask, like, how do you do it? How do you live with all this struggle? And the short answer is I choose to live with joy, because the alternative doesn't seem like a lot of fun. Like, I wouldn't want to be depressed all day. I wouldn't want to be sad all day. I wouldn't want to be in that frustration all day. Who wants that? And some people do, because that becomes their story, unfortunately. But hopefully, through my life, you can see that you have a choice about it. You can see that your story doesn't have to be one where your circumstances make you the victim, that you have victory. You were destined for victory. And hopefully, I've learned some things along the way, and I can impart those insights to people about how do you live a life of victory. And I would say that's probably my overarching message, is that the battle has been won. Like, a lot of us struggle, not just because of our circumstances, but because we feel like we're not enough, or we have doubt about ourselves, or we don't feel like we're lovable, or we're not capable of more. And those are all just lies. You are enough. You don't have to strive. All you have to do is just be yourself and live fully, because victory truly is yours already. And so hopefully that helps anybody who might be listening to this right now, that we are more than conquerors, that we are bigger than our circumstances. And we just can choose to live life with joy and with positivity. And it usually will end up a lot more and a lot better than you can imagine.
That's one of the questions that I was coming to next. That what would you say to somebody who's stuck in that mindset or choosing to be a victim?
Mm-hmm.
And you've just answered that so beautifully. Anything else? Anything in the future that you're planning? Something next in your life that we can look forward to?
Well, I mean, if anyone would like to work with me, I'd be happy to have a conversation. Personally, where my next chapter in my life is going to be empty nesting. My son is going to be going away to college in a completely different state across the Pacific Ocean from me. And so, on a personal level, that's the next chapter in my life, and we'll see what that one looks like. But as for my work, if there's anything I can do to support somebody in achieving their dreams, I would love to have a conversation, because
Yeah,
I truly believe that we're made for more.
yeah, true. Absolutely. I think you're a living proof of that.
Mm,
And it's been such a encouraging conversation. I'm in awe. That's the right word. That's the spirit.
thank you.
So, yeah. Thank you for your time. Thank you for this conversation, for enriching my life with your presence. And I'm sure our listeners will truly enjoy this conversation. And you are such a joy. I think your presence is that positive energy that you share. You're always smiling. The outlook, the way you speak, it's so positive and such a life giver. Your presence.
Thank you.
So
Thank
yeah.
you.
So thank you for your time, and I'm truly grateful.
If you found the content valuable, please like, share, and subscribe and spread the word. I feel the best compliment is being referred. That one action of yours can help us reach more people and fulfill the mission of thriving changes. Thank you for considering.